The rain hit the windows of the small diner like tiny fists, fast and hard, over and over again. It was the kind of night that made people stay inside. The streets were empty, the sidewalks drowning in puddles, and the few customers in the diner sat quietly with their eyes glued to their phones or their coffee cups. The air smelled like old bacon grease and fresh filter coffee, the kind of mix that had settled deep into the walls after years of never closing. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved with slow, tired steps. She'd been wiping the same table for the third time in 5 minutes, not because it was dirty, but because it gave her something to do. Her apron had old stains that wouldn't come out no matter how hard she scrubbed. Her shoes were too thin for the cold floor, and her fingers ached from hours of carrying plates and refilling mugs. She was 23, but felt twice that age. She didn't dream anymore, just counted hours. Tips and how many shifts it would take to pay the electricity bill sitting unopened on her kitchen counter. The clock above the coffee machine read 11:47 p.m., 13 more minutes, she thought. Just 30 more minutes until she could go home, kick off her shoes, and sleep under a blanket that had seen better years. Then the bell above the door. Ring. She looked up without much interest, expecting a regular, maybe someone who always came in drunk and ordered fries. But it wasn't anyone she knew. It was an old man. Soaking wet, his shoulders hunched forward like they were trying to protect him from the world. Rain dripped from his thin coat, pooling on the black and white tiled floor. His shoes squished with every step, soles nearly gone. His gray hair was plastered to his forehead, and his clothes looked like they hadn't been dry in days. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone who wasn't sure he'd be welcome. The waitress stepped out from behind the counter and offered him a soft smile. "Rough night to be out," she said gently, handing him a menu. Her voice had the kind of warmth that only comes from someone who's been through enough to know it matters. He nodded and slid into the booth near the window. The vinyl seat let out a tired sigh beneath him. "Every night's rough when you don't have anywhere to be," he said quietly, eyes not meeting hers. She paused just for a second. His voice wasn't angry or bitter. It was just ... tired, worn down like his shoes. She placed the menu in front of him and gave him a little nod before heading back to the coffee machine. Behind her, she heard the pages of the menu turn slowly, like he was reading something more important than food. She filled a thick white mug with coffee black, hot, strong, and walked it over to his table. He looked up at her, those pale blue eyes now catching the dim light from above. There was something in them, not fear, not even sadness, something older, like regret mixed with silence. "Just coffee?" she asked gently, though she already knew the answer. He nodded, wrapping his cold hands around the mug like it was the only thing keeping him alive. "Thank you," he said, voice softer than before. She turned to go but stopped. Maybe it was the way he held the cup, like it meant more than just caffeine. Maybe it was the way he stared out at the rain, like he was waiting for something that never came. She knew that look. She'd seen it in the mirror too many nights to count. She glanced toward the kitchen. Her manager was busy, not paying attention. "You know," she said slowly, "we made too much soup tonight. The cook hates wasting food. You'd be doing us a favor if you helped us finish some." It was a lie, a kind one. He looked up at her again, eyes searching her face, trying to decide if he should believe her. Maybe he knew it wasn't true. Maybe he didn't care. "What kind of soup?" he asked. "Chicken noodle," she said. "Old family recipe." Another lie. But it sounded nice. He gave a small nod. She smiled and walked away. In the kitchen, she filled a bowl and added a warm dinner roll on the side. She carried it out and set it in front of him. He stared at it like he hadn't seen real food in a long time. He picked up the spoon slowly, hands still trembling, and took a bite. And then something shifted. His shoulders relaxed, just a little. The tightness in his jaw eased. And for a brief second, his eyes closed like he was somewhere safe. "Thank you," he said again, voice steadier this time. She nodded, heart heavy but full. She didn't know it yet, but that one bowl of soup, bought with the last few dollars she'd made in tips, would change both their lives forever. The old man ate slowly, carefully. Every spoonful looked like a quiet blessing, like each bite had weight and memory behind it. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He just ate the soup like it deserved his full attention. The waitress, standing near the counter, watched him from a distance. She didn't mean to stare, it just happened. Something about him made it hard to look away. It wasn't just that he looked tired. Lots of people looked tired. It was something else, a stillness, a silence that wasn't just from the cold. It was the silence of someone who had lived too. Long with regrets, her manager walked out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a stained towel. He spotted the bowl of soup on the table and raised an eyebrow. "You comping that?" he asked, voice low but firm. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, we had too much left over." He narrowed his eyes slightly but didn't argue. He just sighed, like this wasn't the first time she bent the rules for someone who looked hungry. "That's coming out of your tips, you know?" She nodded again, but her eyes didn't leave the old man. The truth was, she hadn't made many tips that night. Barely enough for bus fare and a cup of instant noodles back home. But she didn't care. Not really. Not when she looked at him. The old man finished the soup and leaned back gently in the booth, both hands still wrapped around the coffee mug. He didn't look up, just sat there still and quiet. The diner buzzed softly in the background. The hum of the cooler, the crackle of the fryer shutting down for the night, the occasional rattle of wind against the windows. She finally walked over to him again, wiping her hands on her apron. "Would you like anything else?" she asked gently. Knowing he would say no, he looked up this time. His eyes held a kind of warmth now, just a flicker, but it was there. "No," he said. This was more than enough." "Thank you." She nodded, then reached for the check pad tucked in her apron pocket, but he stopped her. "I'd like to pay for the coffee," he said, reaching into his coat. His hand moved slowly, like every motion cost him effort. Finally, he pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and placed it gently on the table. The soup was a gift. He said, "But coffee should be earned." She stared at the bill for a moment. It was probably all he had. She knew it. He knew she knew it. But to refuse it would be cruel in its own way. So she took it, nodded quietly, and slipped it into her apron without another word. The bell above the diner door rang again, not with the jingle of someone entering, but with the heavy gust of wind that tried to force its way inside. The old man stood slowly, hands pressed to the table as he steadied himself. She watched him adjust his coat, pulling the thin fabric close to his chest like it could protect him from more than just the rain. He paused before the door and turned back. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to tell him, but because nobody had asked her that all night. Not a single customer, not her manager, not anyone. "Lena," she said. He smiled. It was a real smile, not wide, not dramatic, but honest. It changed his face entirely. For a moment, he looked like someone else, someone younger, someone who once belonged to a different world. "Thank you, Lena," he said, "for everything." Then he opened the door and stepped out into the storm. She stood there, staring at the door for a long time after it closed behind him. She didn't know why, but something about that man stayed with her. She didn't even know his name, and yet he felt familiar. Like a story left unread for too long. Lena finally turned and walked back to the counter, reaching under the register to grab her bag. Her shift was over. She'd missed her usual bus. The next one wouldn't come for 20 minutes, maybe more in this weather. She wrapped her jacket tight and stepped outside. The rain now just a soft drizzle, like the sky had finally grown. Tired, she glanced down the street empty. He was gone. As she walked toward the bus stop, her mind wandered to things she hadn't let herself think about in weeks college. Her mom, the painting supplies gathering dust under her bed. Dreams she used to hold close before life told her they were too expensive to keep. But tonight felt different. Somewhere in the city, under the same soft rain, the old man sat beneath a bus shelter. The soup warmed his belly, but it was something else, something new that warmed his heart. A waitress with tired eyes and a kind soul had treated him like he mattered. Had seen him, not the ragged coat, not the quiet sadness, but the man beneath it. And though neither of them knew it yet, that moment, quiet and gentle and honest, was the start of something that neither of them would ever forget. It was the kind of night that changes lives, and neither of them saw it coming. The rain had eased by the time Lena reached the bus stop. Streetlights glowed softly through the mist, their reflections stretching out like long fingers across the wet pavement. She pulled her hood over her head and sat down on the metal bench. Shivering slightly, her coat wasn't made for nights like this. Cold snuck through the seams and settled into her bones. She glanced at her phone. The screen was cracked and the battery hovered at 9%. The next bus would be late, always was. When it rained, she leaned her head back against the glass behind her, closed her eyes, and tried to quiet the hum in her chest that had followed her out of the diner. But it didn't go away. That man, those eyes, the quiet way he had thanked her like she'd handed him the world instead of a bowl of cheap soup. She opened her eyes again and looked across the street. Her breath caught. There he was, sitting on a bench under the small overhang outside the closed pharmacy. His coat was still soaked, still useless. His knees were pulled slightly inward, like he was trying to make himself smaller. His hands were clasped around the coffee cup she'd given him, long since emptied, but still held as if it mattered. Something twisted inside her. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was something older, something more personal. She stood up slowly, checked for cars, then crossed the street with her head down against the wind. He didn't notice her until she was a few feet away. "You okay?" she asked, voice soft. He blinked up at her, surprised. "You again," he said. "Didn't expect to see you outside the diner." "You were still here," she said. "You got somewhere to go?" His smile was faint, lopsided. "That depends. You counting doorways and bus shelters?" She didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air between them. He looked back out toward the road. "Shelters don't open till 6, he said finally. "Sometimes I find one with space. Sometimes I don't." She shifted on her feet, heart pounding. She should walk away. She should say goodbye and get on her bus and go home. That's what most people would do. That's what her mother would tell her to do. Don't trust strangers. Especially not ones who have nowhere to go, but something deeper pushed her forward. "I live about 6 blocks from here," she said. "It's not much, 1 room, but it's dry, and there's a couch." He looked at her, really looked, and for a second she could see the battle behind his eyes, the mix of pride and shame, the years of holding it all in, the fear of accepting help, even when he needed it most. "I couldn't," he said. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," she replied. "I wouldn't offer if I didn't mean it." He stared at her for another long moment, then nodded. They walked in silence, side by side down the wet sidewalks. The city was quiet now, the kind of quiet that only happens after midnight in a neighborhood where people mind their business and keep their doors locked. The streetlights flickered as they passed beneath them, potholes filled with rain. A stray dog barked in the distance. Her apartment building was old but clean. 3 floors, no elevator. She lived on the 2nd. She unlocked the door and stepped aside to let him in. He paused at the threshold, almost like he wasn't sure he was allowed, then crossed it with quiet footsteps. The apartment smelled faintly of peppermint tea and worn-out fabric. A tiny kitchen, a sagging couch, books stacked under the coffee table to stop it from wobbling. A pile of laundry in the corner, clean but unfolded. A single photo on the wall, her and her mother, smiling with tired eyes in a hospital room. "You can sit," she said, motioning to the couch. "I'll grab a towel." She handed it to him and started a kettle. The sound of boiling water filled the small space. somehow comforting in its simplicity. He dried off and settled into the couch. It creaked under his weight but didn't complain. She placed a mug of tea in front of him. It wasn't anything special, cheap bags, no sugar, no milk. But it was warm. He took a sip and exhaled like he hadn't tasted comfort in months. "This is more than I deserve," he said softly. "No one gets exactly what they deserve," she replied. "Good or bad?" He smiled again. That same quiet smile from the diner. Only now it lasted longer. "What should I call you?" she asked. He looked down at the mug, fingers wrapped tight around it. "David," he said finally. "My name's David." She nodded. "Nice to meet you, David. I'm Lena." They didn't talk much after that. Just sat letting the heat from the tea and the silence between them settle in like an old blanket. When he finally drifted off to sleep, curled slightly on the couch beneath the extra quilt she offered, she watched him for a while. Not out of fear, not out of suspicion. Just wondered out who was this man before the storm, before the hunger and the silence. She didn't know it yet, but the answer would change everything. The morning light spilled through the small window like soft gold, landing gently on the quilt that covered David where he lay on the couch. His breathing was steady, his hands tucked beneath his chin like a child who had finally found safety after a long, hard journey. Lena stood quietly in the kitchen, watching him from across the room. She didn't want to wake him, not yet. He looked peaceful, in a way she hadn't seen before. Not just asleep, but at rest. She moved around softly, careful not to make noise as she put the kettle on again. Her apartment was still and warm, the kind of stillness that only exists in those strange hours just after dawn. The city hadn't quite woken up yet, but the birds had started to sing. David stirred gently, eyes fluttering open as the smell of tea filled the room. "Good morning," she said softly. He looked around for a second, as if trying to remember where he was. Then his eyes landed on her and he smiled, not with surprise, but with something like gratitude. "Morning," he whispered back. Lena poured 2 cups of tea and sat at the tiny table across from him. She slid one mug toward him. Without a word, he took it carefully, hands still a little shaky. They sat like that for a while, sipping tea, not speaking. It wasn't awkward. It felt right. Like 2 people who didn't need to fill the silence with noise. "I haven't woken up to tea in a home in a very long time," David said eventually, his voice rough but calm. "I'd almost forgotten what it feels like." Lena looked down at her mug. "Well, it's not much of a home, but it's dry and quiet most of the time. It's everything," he said. "More than most people give." She nodded slowly, unsure how to reply. Then she took a deep breath. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up. "Of course. You smiled last night, right before you left the diner. It changed your whole face. Like for a second you weren't. I don't know, tired, like you were remembering something." David let the question hang in the air between them. He set the mug down gently. His fingers ran across the rim like he was thinking hard about the words he wanted to use. "I was thinking about my daughter," he said finally. "I haven't seen her in 3 years." Lena sat up straighter. "She's probably around your age," he continued. "Last time we talked, we fought. I said things I regret. She stopped answering my calls after that. Can't say I blame her." Lena didn't rush to comfort him. She just listened. That was something her mother taught her. Listening is sometimes more healing than advice. She worked at a nonprofit, he added, helping homeless veterans. She believed in people and causes and change. And he trailed off, swallowing hard. "I was too busy building things to realize I was destroying others." Lena didn't judge him. She knew what pride looked like. She saw it in herself sometimes, in the way she refused help, even when she desperately needed it. In the way her mother still smiled through pain because asking for more felt like weakness. "You should call her," Lena said quietly. David shook his head slowly. "She wouldn't want to hear from me. Are you sure about that? He looked up at her, and for a moment she saw something raw in his eyes. Fear, shame, maybe even hope. No, he said. I guess I'm not. She reached across the table and touched his hand gently, just for a second. You won't know unless you try. David stared at their hands, her fingers resting briefly on his. Then he nodded. I will, he said softly. I will today. A tear rolled down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. They spent the rest of the morning in soft conversation. He told her bits and pieces about who he used to be, nothing specific, just fragments. Stories about working with people who wore expensive suits but said very little of value. About boardrooms and cold dinners, long nights chasing numbers. About loneliness in crowds and quiet regret in corner offices. Lena listened, connecting the dots without needing to ask for more. By the time he stood to leave, the sun was high and bright. His coat was still damp, but he didn't seem to notice. I need to make a call, he said, holding her gaze. Thank you for everything. She smiled and opened the door for him. Come by the diner sometime. Coffee's on me. He really laughed for the first time. I just might. He walked out into the morning and Lena stood by the door, watching him disappear into the waking city. He moved slowly, but with purpose now, like he remembered how to walk forward. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if he'd call his daughter, if he'd find his way back to whatever life he used to live. But she did know one thing. Sometimes the smallest acts, one cup of tea, one warm couch, one quiet conversation could unlock something that had been buried for years. She'd seen it happen, right there in her little apartment. And somehow, without meaning to, she'd helped a stranger find the first step back to himself. David walked with a steadier step that morning. His coat still clung to his shoulders like a burden, but something inside him felt lighter. He didn't know if it was the tea, the couch, or the sound of someone saying his name like it still mattered, but something had changed. He didn't wander, he didn't drift. He walked with a goal, and that hadn't happened in months. He found a small community center about 10 blocks away that offered use of their phones for people without one. The volunteer at the front desk smiled at him without flinching, handed him a worn-out handset, and pointed toward a chair in the corner. He stared at the phone for a long time before dialing. He knew her number by heart. Hadn't deleted it even when the silence had stretched too far to call it anything but a wall. His hands trembled as he punched in the digits, not from age but from fear. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then she picked up. Hello? Her voice hadn't changed. Not really. A little older, a little more tired maybe, but still hers. He swallowed. It's me, he said. I don't know if you'll want to hear this, but I'm sorry. There was silence. Long, breathless silence. Then, quietly, Dad? He closed his eyes. I should have called sooner, he said. I should have? Listen more, I messed up. I let everything fall apart because I thought I was right. But last night, someone reminded me what being human looks like. Another silence. Then a breath. A shaky one. I've been waiting for this call for 3 years, she said. His chest tightened. The room blurred. I didn't know how to fix it, he whispered. I thought I had to have something to offer first. You did. Your voice. That's what I needed. Just this. They talked for 2 hours. Slowly, awkwardly, but honestly. He learned that she had a son now, his grandson, a boy he'd never met. That she was still working at the nonprofit. That her heart had grown stronger, even after he'd broken it. And she listened to his truth. About the money he gave away. About sleeping in bus shelters. About the girl at the diner who gave him soup and a couch without ever asking for his name. He didn't tell her everything, but he told her enough. When the call ended, she said, Come home. We're having dinner tomorrow. You should meet your grandson. He didn't have words, just tears. He hung up slowly and turned to thank the volunteer. But the moment felt too big for words, so he simply nodded and left. That night, he slept at a shelter. But the room didn't feel so cold anymore. He had a folded paper in his coat pocket with an address scribbled on it. A dinner invitation. A chance. And all because a waitress with tired eyes and too many bills had decided to care. Lena's life continued, but something inside her had shifted too. She went back to the diner the next day and the one after that. The routine hadn't changed. The floor still creaked. The coffee still tasted burnt after 10 p.m., but she noticed more. The way people looked down when they walked in. The way they sometimes needed kindness but didn't know how to ask for it. She hadn't seen David again. Part of her thought maybe she never would. That maybe his visit was like a dream, a one-night chapter that passed without a sequel. But she remembered his smile, the way he said her name, the way his hands stopped shaking after the soup. A week later, on a rainy afternoon, a woman walked into the diner. She was well-dressed, early 30s, with tired but kind eyes. She walked straight up to the counter and asked, "Are you Lena?" Lena nodded slowly, unsure why her name was being asked by someone so polished. "I'm David's daughter." The woman said, "He told me about you, about that night." Lena felt her stomach twist. "Is he okay?" "He's more than okay," the woman said, smiling. "He's with us. With family again. We had dinner last night. First one in years." She pulled out an envelope and handed it over. "He wanted you to have this." Lena stared at it, confused. She opened it slowly, her hands trembling. Inside was a handwritten letter and a folded check. She gasped. The amount was more than she'd ever seen in her life. Enough to pay off her mother's hospital bills. Enough to go back to college. Enough to breathe, but it was the letter that broke her. "You reminded me who I was. You helped me find my way. Back when I didn't even know I was lost. Because of you, I have a second chance with my family. Because of you, I'm alive in a way I haven't been for years. Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but it's all I have. Until now. Please accept this and know it comes from the deepest part of my heart. You changed my life with a bowl of soup in a quiet room. I hope this changes yours." David. Lena looked up, tears filling her eyes. The woman smiled gently. "He said he'd understand." And Lena did, because it was never about the money. It was about seeing someone when the world had stopped looking. About offering warmth when no one else would. About remembering that kindness, no matter how small, can be the beginning of everything. And for David, it was. The envelope stayed on Lena's kitchen table for 2 days before she finally deposited the check. She stared at it every morning like it might vanish, like it was too much goodness for someone like her to keep. The letter she'd read 5 times already, each word etched into her memory like it had been written on her bones. She kept that part close. It wasn't just a gift. It was proof that someone had seen her, not just the waitress, not just the tired girl scraping by, but the person underneath. The one with dreams she hadn't spoken aloud in years. The money was enough to solve the kind of problems that used to keep her awake at night. Her mother's overdue medical bills. The balance on her college account that had kept her out of class, the debt that hung over their heads like a cloud. But something deeper had shifted. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about purpose. She'd always wanted to help people. She just didn't think she had anything to give. Now she did. Within a month, she'd re-enrolled at the local college. Social work, something she'd once thought about when life was gentler, before everything got hard. Now it made perfect sense. Her classes were hard and the days were long. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel stuck. She felt like she was building something real. She still worked at the diner on weekends. Not because she had to anymore, but because she wanted to. It grounded her, kept her close to the place where everything had changed. She still wiped down those same old tables, refilled coffee, and smiled at strangers who needed someone to notice them. And sometimes, when the doorbell chimed and the wind pushed open the door just a little too hard, she'd glance up, half expecting to see David's weathered face again. He never came back, but his daughter did. One Saturday morning, she stopped by with her young son, a quiet, curious boy with dark hair and a gap-toothed smile. Lena brought them pancakes on the house, and they talked like old friends, even though they only met once. The boy asked questions about the diner, about coffee machines and syrup bottles, and Lena answered everyone like it was the most important thing she'd do all day. Later, in the parking lot, the woman gave her a warm hug and said, "He talks about you often. Says you saved his life." Lena shook her head gently. "I just gave him soup." "No," she said. "You gave him dignity. That's what saved him." Those words stayed with her. She couldn't stop thinking about the others, the people who walked through the diners. Doors every night with wet jackets, empty wallets, and eyes full of quiet hunger. People like David, people like she had once been Dot, so she started something small. A handwritten sign taped near the cash register. "If you're hungry but short on money, tell the staff you'd like a community meal. No questions, no shame." She spoke to the manager, who agreed reluctantly, then grew to support it. Customers started slipping her $5 bills with their receipts. "Pay it forward," they'd say. "Put it toward the next one." Within a few weeks, the idea had a name, David's Table. She didn't advertise it, didn't post about it online. It wasn't about attention. It was about making sure that the next quiet, rain-soaked stranger who came in wouldn't have to ask, wouldn't have to choose between pride and hunger, and every now and then, after closing, when the lights were low and the kitchen was clean, she'd sit in that same booth David had once occupied, coffee in hand, watching the rain slide down the windows, remembering Dot not out of sadness, out of gratitude. Dot, because one night, a stranger walked into her life and reminded her what kindness could do. Dot, and now she was doing the same for others, for herself, and for the girl she used to be. Her mother was doing better too. They'd moved into a slightly bigger apartment. Nothing fancy, but it had 2 windows and a tiny balcony where her mom had started growing herbs and shipped coffee mugs. Some mornings they sat out there together, sipping tea and watching the sunrise, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, as they watched the city lights flicker on, her mom turned to her and said, "You seem different lately. Lighter." Lena nodded. "I think I found my way again." She didn't go into details, didn't talk about the storm, the soup, or the check, but she did mention David, how he'd been kind in return, how he'd made her remember the importance of small things. Her mother smiled. "Funny how strangers can teach us things no one else can." Lena smiled too. Not just strangers. People who were lost. People who chose to come back. 6 months passed, then a year. And still, the booth near the window stayed open a little longer each night. Still, the sign remained taped to the register. And still, Lena kept showing up, not because she had to, but because she believed that sometimes the right moment, the right cup of coffee, the right word could reach someone exactly when they needed it. Just like it had for David. Just like it had for her. One cool autumn morning. The diner's windows fogged up from the warmth inside, meeting the crisp air outside. Leaves swirled along the sidewalk in shades of amber and rust. The street was quiet except for the occasional passing car. Inside, the bell above the door jingled softly, followed by the low murmur of footsteps. Lena looked up from the coffee machine. It had been a quiet shift so far. She liked mornings best, less noise, more space to think. She still worked here, even with college classes and her part-time work at the community shelter. It kept her grounded, connected to where everything began. A man in his mid-30s stepped inside. He wore a clean coat, simple but nice. He had tired eyes and a soft smile. He paused, scanning the room, and walked to the counter with quiet steps. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Are you the one who started David's Table?" Lena looked up, slightly surprised. "I am." He nodded and extended his hand. "My name's Tom. David Sterling was my uncle." She froze. Not in fear, but in something deeper. The name hit like a soft wave, warm, familiar. "He passed away last week," Tom said. "Peacefully. At home with family." Lena placed the mug she was holding down on the counter and met his eyes. I'm so sorry. Tom smiled kindly. Don't be. He was happy. Really happy those last few months. He talked about you a lot. A silence fell between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. He said you reminded him what being alive felt like. Tom continued. He left something behind for you. From his coat pocket, he pulled a smaller envelope. Not thick like the last one. This one looked like a goodbye. Lena opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, another note in the same careful handwriting she remembered. Dear Lena, I don't have much time left, but I couldn't leave without saying thank you again. You gave me more than soup. You gave me the mirror I didn't know I needed. You showed me who I had been and who I could still become. Because of you, I called my daughter. I met my grandson. I held his hand and told him bedtime stories. I died with love in my life again because of you. There are people in this world who hold open the doors others forgot were there. You're one of them. Please don't stop. Keep that door open. For the next me, for the next someone who's lost. With all my heart, David. Her vision blurred as she folded the letter back into the envelope, hands gently pressing it against her chest. Tom spoke again, his voice quieter now. He set up a fund through the foundation he rebuilt. It's called Lena's Light, meant to support people like you students, caretakers, people who give more than they get. It's already helped 3 families. Lena couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from something purer. Something that felt like completion. Like something had come full circle. That night she sat in the same booth David once had. Outside, the wind tugged at the windows. The diner was quiet. The David's Table sign was still taped near the register, weathered, curled at the corners, but still there. Still holding space. She looked out at the rain and thought about how everything had started with a bowl of soup, a cracked mug of coffee, and a lie told with kindness. What she didn't know that night, what she couldn't have imagined, was that giving someone a place to sit could help them find their way back home. She took out her notebook and began to write, not a journal entry, not an assignment. Just thoughts, feelings, fragments of a moment too big to hold in one memory dot as the pages filled. Her mind drifted to her future, a future now possible because of one choice. To care dot to give when she had almost nothing to spare dot to see a stranger as human, not broken. 6 months later, Lena graduated with honors in social work. The shelter she volunteered at hired her full-time. She opened a small outreach program through the Lena's Light Fund, providing meals and career resources to people in transition. Every person who walked through the doors got something else too, a handwritten card, simple, folded in half, always placed next to the food tray. You matter. Someone sees you. You're not alone. People often asked her where the idea came from. She'd smile, shake her head gently, and say, just something a friend once taught me. She never told them about the soup, or the rain, or the old man with trembling hands and tired eyes. She kept that story close, like a lantern lit deep inside her. But sometimes on quiet nights, she'd return to the booth by the window and sit with a warm cup of coffee, eyes watching the rain slide down the glass, and wonder, how many other strangers have walked into the lives of people who chose to? Care? How many stories never get told? How many lives change in silence? Lena didn't need answers. She only needed to keep going, because the smallest kindness can echo through generations, because seeing someone fully just once can restore life, because sometimes the real gift is knowing you mattered in a moment someone else was invisible. And because in the end, the wealth that matters most is the kind we give away quietly, completely, and with love.